and our conversation about workplace recovery, finding a place to work post a natural disaster. And it's certainly been in all of our minds with the events that have been going on around the country. And wanted to bring this to you today. And we've got some interesting people that are going to share some insights as we continue our discussions. As we start these, we want you to join us on social media, on Twitter at Firestorm Soul, and on Facebook at Firestorm Solutions. There is a hashtag for this session, and that's hashtag Crisis Coach. So if you've got questions or comments, you can send them there, or you can use the toolbar that's on the upper right-hand side of the screen. Firestorm transforms crisis into value, and we empower you to manage crisis and risk. Our expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. Firestorm is America's crisis coach, and we follow a predict, plan, perform methodology. We have attorneys just like everyone else, and they always want us to make sure that we say today's presentation isn't complete without the oral comments and discussion, and any work product provided should be read in conjunction with guidance by your legal counsel and other authorities. And hey, we're not providing any legal advice or legal opinion. By the way, we're going to provide a lot of advice and opinions, just not legal as we talk about it. Dr. Michael Redmond couldn't be with us this morning, but this session is underwritten by the Eastern Great Lakes Association of Contingency Planners, and we're always glad to team with the organization in sharing these messages out in the marketplace, and hoping you will get involved with them. They have local meetings there in Western New York, with Rochester and in Buffalo, and it's a great opportunity to peer network with them and understand what the advantages are within the association. We've got several potential people today to talk, and I think you're going to hear mostly from myself. I'm that old guy over on the left, and Dan Perrin. Dan is the Global Solutions Director for Regis. Dan, what do you want to tell us about Regis before we get started?
Hey, thanks, Jim. Regis is a service office organization that we have 3,000 locations globally, and 1,100 of those are in North America. But we also offer a product called Workplace Recovery, which helps organizations continue operations when a disaster strikes their facilities.
And Dan will share some insights and some particular planning areas that I think you're going to find extremely helpful as you start to think about what do we need to know and think about in our organization to deal with the type of events that we've been seeing. And it's an overwhelming need that can make a significant difference for each of us. So as we move on, we did a survey of about 1,000 organizations as we were looking at both schools and workplaces and identifying what their number one concern is. And over to the left, you see violence, workplace violence, the terrorism events, the shootings in Las Vegas have certainly been center stage with a lot of the meetings that I've held over the last week. And everybody's thinking about what would that mean if it happened in my area and what do we need to do. Cyber attack remains a primary concern, just a little over a fourth there. The Equifax story has really gravitated many people as you look at the direct impacts with the CEO, the CIO, the CISO, and the CFO in that organization. Just the sheer size and magnitude of those, that's certainly not going away. You'll see loss of life there at 6% and significant reputation event, 15%. Those reputation events could well be some of the things we've talked about. Loss of life could clearly be in the violence area that we've discussed. But a solid 24%, just under a fourth of everyone, are still focused on natural disasters. And I think if we were to do that survey again today after the hurricanes, I think you would see that going up. Also, after the news with the fires coming out of California, when you look at the human impact of each of those types of events. And I think it's good that we're focusing today to talk about natural disaster. A lot of times we deal with the brand and image and violence issues or the cyber, but sometimes we just forget that Mother Nature can make a significant difference in the impact on all of our organizations. I would like to thank everybody for joining us today to be a part of this. And if you have questions, you can use that toolbar up on the right. We'll try to get to those. If we can't during the conversation today, we'll reach out to everyone individually. So as we move from that, I would like to ask you a question to think about your business today. How robust is your business continuity strategy? And I think that's the overwhelming theme in these webinars on a regular basis as we talk about those events. That cloud looks fairly ominous there on the horizon, and I think it creates a new sense of awareness for all of us. And when you think about how good that plan is and how robust it is, then have you tested it? That's a crane shot out of Miami there, as you saw the hurricane winds doing the damage associated with it. By the way, the crane business from an insurance perspective is a very high risk factor just for the kinds of things that you're looking at and what's the damage factor associated with it in handling these types of events. But as we think about them, we need to really take a step back and think about in a natural disaster, we need to say, what about the impact would it be if it was your organization? How do you get back to business? And business continuity, as everybody knows and consistently as we've talked, it's about how do we run the business no matter what happens. And clearly these events, the overwhelming surge of the human toll. We did a conversation at Firestorm over the last few Fridays as we were talking with our staff around the country and asking them for what word comes to mind as you look at these. And we heard words like horrific and the word hopeless and hopelessness, particularly when you look at the human toll in Puerto Rico. That's clearly apparent to us all what those impacts are. So when we see Harvey and Irma, Maria, and Nate, then the question is what's next? And if we had an earthquake today in California, which we certainly hope we won't have, imagine the human toll that would take. Just looking at the fires that are happening in Northern California and driven by the winds, the loss of homes and other areas. So I would like to encourage you all to go back to your hazard impact matrix. Look at your hazard vulnerability analysis. And as you list all the event types, many of them are in a natural disaster area. And the first thing you want to do is look at the probability. And then your shift goes over to severity. And your chart may be different than ours, but as you would go through, if you were at the highest levels in each of those with the lowest forewarning, the longest duration, high human impacts, high property, high operational impacts, then you're at a base risk level of 100%. Now, if it's less, then that number would come up lower, but that number is mitigated by how much planning you have in place. The pre-action area, what are your internal resources, your external resources, and if you have none, it remains at that 100% level. If you have those, it lowers that risk impact substantially within those areas. So as you think about that, think about what you have. If you lower those, for example, if the base risk level was 100 in this case, and you had the others in place, it would probably be enough to cut it down to 60% if you had maxed out in those areas. So what your mitigation planning is, it gives you documentation. As a general rule, when your net risk level comes to be over 40%, those are things that your plans need to address immediately. We're working currently with a large organization in California, and when you look at if that event hit their building, their primary location, what would be the impact on their business and how could they mitigate it in having it come through? So as we think about those, there are a couple of types of damages. There's the direct damage that happens to your organization, and then there's indirect damages caused by people losing their jobs and incomes. The number of people that don't have jobs today in some of these areas is gigantic, and if they can't get to where they're going, it's certainly extreme. Dan, I know we're going to talk some more, but is there anything you want to say about where we see ourselves today just overall in this area in looking at those particular hurricanes and other natural events and the types of damages?
You know, I was thinking about the first slide, and the percent of people that were going to be affected by a natural disaster is a major impact. I think it was at 24% there. And
Yeah.
that's noting that it's been 5 years since Hurricane Sandy. And I think we, if, like you said, post-Hurricane Harvey, post-Hurricane Irma, Mexico City earthquake, and now California fires, I think that would definitely be a significant increase for that line.
And I think you're 100% correct. And by the way, for everybody listening, one of the things you might want to do is to use this as an opportunity to have a conversation with the leadership within your organization. And you could share that number and share the comments that Dan added the Mexico earthquake in. And by the way, Dan, the client that we were dealing with in California, a lot of their employees have relatives in Mexico. And so there was a fear factor that was developed as a result of that within their organization. And so you had the fires, the Las Vegas shootings. I think you're going to see an increased acceptance within your organization to bring those conversations up. And you might use that strategy that we did with our Firestorm meeting by saying, when you think about those, what words come to your mind? Because if you can help your leadership self-discover this, it's going to help you drive your plan and your approach home on a better basis with them. So when you look at these, the initial estimates from insurance companies put Harvey at $3 billion alone, and if you start to then add in Irma, you're looking at $100 to $200 billion hit. We've certainly seen here in Atlanta the higher gas prices, the number of businesses have gone up substantially. I was startled by the pictures of the planes in flight right after Irma was coming through, where you look at the whole southeast, there was just no air traffic through that period of time. And you're not going to be able to get back with the roads that are destroyed, the crop damage. So we're going to all feel that in the grocery stores in the coming weeks as we see those events continue to happen. So it's not necessarily just the impact that happens directly to your business. It's the impact that's happening to your employees and to your suppliers. Today, the largest single failure in a disaster or a crisis is supply chain failure. So when people in your office say, well, look, we're not in Houston, we're not in Miami, but you may have suppliers, you may have supply chains that run through those areas, and the direct impact would certainly be felt. So one of the things I think you have to think of, and I believe this, Dan, is going to set us up for talking about some of the reasons why you need a more dynamic recovery strategy, is you may not be able to get from there to here. This is a picture, I believe, Karen, that you shared with us after the hurricanes hit the Charleston area in a previous storm. And if you look at that disruption factor, I don't believe anybody's getting to work down that road today. And if you can't get to your home, all those families that we've seen on TV about the fire, they just are going to be overwhelmed for a while. So, Dan, when you came up with the idea of dynamic recovery, is this the type of factor that drove you?
Yeah, definitely. And to your point, Jim, just because you're in the Midwest or upper Midwest doesn't mean that you can't be impacted by an event. I think we go back to about 7 years when we had the massive bridge failure in Minnesota. That was a normal day of the week. I mean, it was a sunny day, but the bridge failed, right? And
right.
That took a whole section of the city out of commission from getting back and forth across the river. So if you have a significant number of your employees that live on the south side and your operations on the north side, to reroute those folks to get to the office every day is a major challenge.
We had in Atlanta where somebody burned the road down, burned the highway down right in the center of Atlanta. And you put 250,000 people that couldn't get to downtown Atlanta on any basis. So yeah, you disrupt this, you change that workflow, it's crippling. When you look at Washington, D.C., you take out the bridges over the Potomac. If you're west of the city, you're not getting into D.C. And so we've seen this in power and other manufacturing areas where this single factor makes you think about it and needing to be a more dynamic area. When we say dynamic, Dan, talk to me a little bit about what makes it dynamic.
Well, dynamic means that you've got multiple solutions in place from a recovery standpoint. You're not just going to, you haven't just identified one other building to go to. That it would be kind of a hardened site for you, because that, depending, everyone has a different plan. It could be across the street from your current facility. It could be a mile away, but that in and of itself is not dynamic. That's would be called a static recovery site. A dynamic recovery site means that your people can probably go in just about any direction from where they live or where your office is in order to recover. So it could be a Regis solution. It could be a major hotel chain solution that you have in a contract with. There's a lot of different solutions you can have in place to support that, but it's the ability to get to someplace to work. I wouldn't suggest necessarily a Starbucks solution, because that's fraught with all different types of scenarios, negative issues.
Well, it goes back and picks up that cyber breach exposure opportunity.
That's right.
You said something very important, and so I want to solidify that. I know we're going to go into a lot more depth. You want to go on and think about this in advance and put it in place. We were doing an exercise with an organization the other day, and they said, well, we'll just go over to the hotel. Well, everybody in town's just going to go over to the hotel. So if you don't have a commitment that you're going to have rooms and access, you won't have it. And secondly, if you're picking a solution that's within close proximics to your primary location, and your location was hit by a natural disaster event, a tornado, a flood, an earthquake, the chances are those in the immediate proximity will also be impacted. So having multiple choices and redundancy is a critical aspect when we think about business continuity professionals and what you have to have in place. Now, alternative work locations, and by the way, Dan and Regis is a global company, and they do this in thousands of offices around the world. And this was a survey, Dan, I believe your folks asked, where are people going to go? And you start to see it laid out there, and about 40% of the time, 39% as you had listed here, are saying, well, we'll just send everybody home. We're going through a program now where that was the theory within an organization, but when we started analyzing how many people have the equipment and the capabilities to remote access, and by the way, if they left their laptop at the office and they're trying to go home and the office is gone, that's not going to work. Any conclusion you want us to draw out of this analysis that Regis did, Dan?
Well, working from home is a great solution if it's a single site event and it only affects your facility. But what we found with Hurricane Sandy, Hurricane Harvey, and Irma is that probably not the best solution. In Sandy, residential areas took 10 days to get back online from a power standpoint. 7 million people left South Florida during Irma, so there's a good chance that your team wasn't even around to work from home. I know my sister lives in West Palm Beach, and she and her kids and grandkids, they all left that Saturday and didn't get back for 8 days, and they drove all the way past the Mississippi because all the hotel rooms from Georgia through to Texas were booked, right, Jim?
They were. I wish I'd been in the hotel business that week.
Yeah.
But the picture that you look at that's up on the screen is, I think, good proof of what Dan was saying here. The people that live in these houses aren't going to be having business as usual and doing their normal routine from home. It's just not going to physically be able to happen. And the 10-day figure, and so if you've got the ability to recover people remotely and having work locations for them spread out well past your area, because somebody's going to go and live with a relative, they're going to team somewhere else, but it could be a significant distance away. And it's not only just your people, it's thinking about your vendors and suppliers. The single greatest failure, as I shared earlier, in a disaster or crisis is supply chain failure. Can your vendor, can your suppliers get their business up and working? And the word up there, tested. have you included them in a test exercise that you're doing and validated that their plans are in place? And you look at the percentages that Regis has shared with us, and Dan, thanks for giving us an insight and kind of looking under the covers of seeing what's here. It's a significant factor that, look, there's a pretty big gap here between having business as usual and with these impacts associated with it. Before I move away from suppliers, you want to add any other thoughts, Dan?
Yeah, I think right now, we strongly encourage all of our clients to test at least annually, and we're still at a 50% threshold, even though we constantly communicate it to them. So what happens is that the first time, even if you have a plan in place, if you don't test it, the worst time to try to figure out whether it works or not is when the disaster's already happened.
Yeah, the impacts, that's not a good area. And then the questions of why didn't we test it, why haven't we done it, will start to surface, and the Monday morning quarterbacking will come in. By the way, and through this entire process, I would encourage each of you to take the test, the tabletops that you're doing, or looking at the actual events. Write a letter, or have your risk manager write a letter to your insurance broker and saying, if that event happened to us, either the exercise you've designed or the one that's in the headline, tell us how our insurance would become involved with that. We universally find that there's kind of a blockage between the risk management side within the organization, the purchase of insurance, and the business continuity professional who's trying to design the plans. And so I think that we have found that there's sometimes a gap between what's happening in the real world and what's being bought by insurance. And you don't want to find out that suddenly you don't have the business interruption or you don't have the funding to recover. And I'll point out that one of our expert council members, Jack Healy, his firm and another company where he was the CFO, had a tornado hit their warehouse, and they started using their employees to help get things back up and in track. And the insurance company said, oh, well, that's your employees. We don't have to reimburse you for them because you had to pay them anyway. Better to know that in advance instead of being surprised in the actual event. So when we think about it, if you're too close, that we already talked about that, I think, in it. If it's too small, if you can't get everybody in it, or if it's too far, and particularly with the damage that people couldn't get to that location and then get back home, and they're concerned because family trumps job, those are big areas. But the startling thing to me is the big red box to the right on this slide that Dan and Regis have pointed out, that 73% of businesses share their concern about security. When you think about the shootings in Las Vegas that just occurred, I was on the phone with a company, and they had some employees there, and they were trying to get in touch with them to see if they were okay. Had they attended the event? What do they need to do? How do they better manage in those areas? So having a predetermined area where security is clear from the beginning would certainly make a difference in how those things come together. I'm going to scoot on, Dan, unless you want to add something onto that slide.
No, that's fine, Jim.
Okay, so points to consider. You've got to predict what the vulnerability is. That's the reason we share the vulnerability threat analysis work. Plan your response. What are the decisions you're going to need to make? What are the actions you're going to need to take? And what are the words that you need to say whenever this happens? And so understanding all the vulnerabilities in the areas, Dan talked about the bridge in Minnesota. What are the physical limitations that are there? What's our plan? And get everyone to buy in and understand that. And then make sure you have the protocols. We responded to about 6 crises a day, and we were working with a public company, and their strategy was they needed to notify all employees at home, and that's a good strategy in a particular event, except they didn't have a mass notification system. They didn't have the employees' personal phones. They didn't have their personal emails. And so the what was really clear: notify employees at home. The how wasn't there. And so as you look at your plans, a self-check rule that you can do is review the plan and say, yeah, that's clear, it shows me what, and then ask yourself, does it show people how to do that? If you'll put that focus on I think it'll make a difference. So is remote working feasible? I guess looking at the picture there, that one would probably be something that could happen remotely and come together. If you've got a manufacturing facility, I don't think we're going to pick the plant up and move it across town as we think of those areas. So would you be able to continue those operations remotely? By the way, the majority of people that we review their plans say, oh yeah, all of our people have laptops, but then they don't require them to carry them at home at night, and so therefore it's going to impact it. So what are the requirements for remote access? How do they get in? What is the impact? We're dealing with a company right now where they have to remote back into their desktop and then do the connection, but if the power's out at the headquarters, that remote access through a desktop wouldn't be working. And then just as you have identified in your own business impact analysis, identifying what the staff is and what the resources and where you are on day 1, day 3, day 7, and looking at your RTOs, your recovery time objectives, and then what is the minimum staffing level. You're not going to be able to get everybody back, but who is the most critical and what do we need to do in looking at it. Now there's I think this is a good time to start to say practically, great, we hear it, we buy it. Let's start thinking about some checklists and things that you need to do. And I asked Dan to share the checklist from Regis, and your business may be slightly different, and you may not be on this list, but you see proximity, size, capacity, budget, dedicated versus flex seating, physical, non-physical security, mailing facilities, reliability during the incident. Those, I think, Dan, are great issues, and you certainly created a bunch of wonderful questions here. So if these are Regis's checklist, I would ask everyone on the call today to say, what are your checklists? What are you looking at? Really becomes the driver. So if I was choosing a location, Dan, are these in the order of priority, or is there something else you want me to get from this list of questions?
No, I think that's a good list, top down to start from. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about when you're thinking about recovery and who's critical to your organization from a recovery standpoint. We found that in Hurricane Harvey, it was pretty quiet for the first 4 days, and that was because no one could get a hold of the employees that were that could go back and do assessments of their own facilities. So you had a 24-hour or 48-hour RTO in Houston. That wasn't met. That didn't work. And so Regis, and I think most organizations do this, when you have a potential event, we start communicating with our employees. I mean, I'm sorry, not our employees, our clients about who's going to recover, where do you want to recover, what's your plan, or do you want to execute your plan? And we had very little uptake prior to the event for Hurricane Harvey, because it had been 5 years since Hurricane Sandy, and everyone's initial instinct is, oh, it's probably not going to hit us, right? Now, for Hurricane Irma, before we even started doing that communication, all the companies that we had, all of our clients in Florida were reaching out to us going, hey, we need to get out of town. We had companies getting on planes and just flying their critical teams to Atlanta, to Nashville, we had a company take 30 people to Detroit. I thought it was an interesting place to take them, but they flew them all the way to Detroit. So, you know, it's interesting to look at the recovery standpoint or the planned recovery standpoint from the duration since the last major event, people's impressions of what they need to do versus it's been 1 week, what do we need to do?
All right, so if we focus on the location, obviously in my company I need to think about who do I need. So the staff comes in, and again I would point out to everyone that you need to be coming up with your own list of questions for your staff in a recovery location opportunity. So why would they do that? Why would they want to come? The staff requirements, the security, the staffing, work from home. Because home is a viable option if you have power and it's safe. If you don't have power and it's not safe, I looked at all the homes in California after the wildfires. There's no home to go to. So what this means and where we're trying to go, and Dan, I think you've given us some good insights here. While they're looking at their list, any particular aspect you want to stress?
Well, working from home, I mean, if someone isn't currently working from home on at least a quarterly basis, and they're a key critical member of your team from a recovery standpoint, that's probably fraught with all kinds of dangers from the standpoint of, do they have a laptop? Do you have VPN on that laptop? If they're working from home, what is their home environment like to manage that? Because if it's an area-wide event, it's not just your employee that's home; their kids are at home, and you know, you may or may not have power. Power might be intermittent. So, but remember, you're recovering your organization, and we found after Hurricane Sandy that 30% of companies that were completely impacted by that event never came back. So being able to communicate with your clients, your customers, your other employees is critical. In staff working from home may or may not be a good idea, depending on how are they doing that today, and how have you planned for it, and what tools and resources have you given them to be able to do that.
And this is a benefit, and I think the more that your employees know that the company is doing it, the greater the benefit would be from that organization. So we've got now confirming the numbers, recording the requirements. The requirements may increase or decrease over time. What other activities are dependent on it? Again, I direct you back to your business impact analysis. My department depends upon that department for this process or this function, how that works, who are my external dependencies, how would that come together, and then how do my senior leadership teams meet? In addition to virtual meetings, is it good to have a place that they can go to and sit and work through these types of events? So I think confirm those numbers. It will tell you so that you don't overpay, don't overbuy, get more than you really need, but similarly aren't understaffed or under facility available. Some of your employees could easily be in flex space. Others, you may need a much more detailed, dedicated scenario. So I'm going to jump to your other list, Dan, but before I do, anything else on confirming the numbers?
Yeah, and one thing about senior leadership, there's lots of different events that could be an event that requires your senior executive teams to go off-site, to recover off-site in order, you know, there could be a protest outside your facility. One of your suppliers could be impacted, or they may have an event that it's funneled up to you, and your team needs to be away from there in order to avoid the press while they come together with a plan of action. So those are just other things that, you know, a lot of companies don't think about. What happens if we've got protesters out or there's a strike at our facility? You know, there's things that you need to think about from a recovery standpoint that aren't always natural disaster.
Your strike is a great example, or a protest. Obviously, we're seeing the environment where people have political issues coming into the workplace, and it could certainly disrupt a business. I saw that the other day in Atlanta. And then you've got to have technology. It's great that you've got a place to go, but if the pipe's not big enough to get everybody on the computer at the same time, if you need hardware, and some of the facilities, well, I know Regis can arrange to have hardware drop shipped to a location so that you can have those capabilities there to provide that, and phone lines and phone access. While we all are immediately think of our cell phones, having some other capabilities in place certainly improves the level of what we're looking at. And again, I would encourage everyone, these are the checklists that Regis has been very kind to share with us, but you need to have them worked out for your organization and how your plan's going to fit. Anything else on technology, Dan?
No, I think that list covers it pretty well.
Okay, and by the way, you can tell that Regis is a global firm, so their organizations have the S and not the Z that's associated in it. But physical security and cybersecurity certainly are paramount in all of these areas. And there are three types of communications in a crisis communications. One is coordination. What do you want people to do? Where are they to go? How are they going to function? Secondly, it's the crisis itself. Now, generally, those brand and reputation comments can be deferred for 24 hours. An additional reason to do that is that most everything you learn initially is wrong, and so many times you're seeing comments come out that later have to be retracted. And the last is regulatory. Someone regulates you, or you have some key contractual obligations or service level agreements within your organizations. So those things serve as surrogate regulators, that they're understanding what those requirements are and what you need to do are certainly important. And it doesn't matter if your organization's an S or a Z, it's going to come to play. Now, as we look for that, what do you look for? And I think this is a good summary, Dan. The ability to declare the crisis, testing it, and your recommendation they test the plan at least once a year is certainly a key requirement. And we're seeing that now expanding beyond the traditional areas where business continuity is played. Right now, Medicare and Medicaid in the healthcare field have identified 17 types of facilities, and they require both a tabletop exercise as well as a full simulation activation. So if that's becoming the standard there, that's soon a standard for you, and going and using a facility or working from the remote area makes a difference. Desktop telephonics today, voice over IP, it's amazing what we can do once we get our data lines back up. So Dan, any of these you want to particularly emphasize?
Yeah, when you're dealing with service providers, make sure that if you have sign a contract with one of them and there's multiple companies that need to recover, what's your priority? I mean, is it first come, first served? Do you have a percentage of the deaths that they have at their facility, or are you guaranteed seats that you contracted for within the marketplace that you contract? Because a lot of the service providers will say you can recover within our network, but their network might be 30 locations spread across the United States, and your employees typically, and I can say this with about 99% accuracy, aren't willing to drive longer than what they drive today to get to the office, to a recovery site. So
having a firm commitment and knowing it's going to be there when you need it is important. And I know, Dan, you guys did some great things after Hurricane Harvey. You even let people had free lounge access to come in and activate. So it's good to have players that give back and support the communities that they're in. But imagine if that was your business with the water up that high, what it would mean to your organization in having a place to go and see and do. So as we wrap up, there's some things that you can obtain. Next week on our website, you'll be able to download a brief from today's webinar. There will also be a recording that you can listen to it on demand or share that with others in your organization. To do that, I would encourage you to think about that demand library on a regular basis as a way to look and do those. Also, Regis is making available a download of how to protect your business from a catastrophe. And I assume, Dan, the checklist that we had up on the screen would be in that particular guide. Is that a reasonable assumption?
That's a good assumption, Jim.
Okay. And it's certainly helpful, and I personally have used the Regis offices and I've used their materials, and I would strongly recommend them to you as a way to make a difference. So go to the regisworkplacerecovery.com/checklist/checklist, and that'll give you access to it. We'll include a lot of that also in our brief, but there's something that you can utilize immediately. Our thanks go back out to the Eastern Great Lakes Association of Contingency Planners and ACP. If you want to view webinars, you can go to firestorm.com and look at the resources there and on-demand watch past webinars or download briefs associated with it. You can also register for future webinars. And if you've got questions, you can send them to us at firestorm.com or send us an email at webinars@firestorm.com, or you can pick up the phone and call us at 800-321-2219. Firestorm has a program called Crisis Stop. If you're in a crisis and you have a problem, you can call us in that first hour, and there is no cost to you because the decisions you make, the action you take, and the words you say will determine if your crisis is going to stabilize or escalate. So, Dan, we covered a lot of ground in a very short period of time today. Any last advice you want to make sure that everyone has?
Well, I would just encourage everyone to get senior leadership buy-in on a plan of action and make some type of recovery plan a priority within your organization. The fact that you're on this call is a great start if you don't have one in place today. But it's really important to have a plan that the people that are critical to that plan, that they know what their responsibilities are and that you're able to get a hold of them when the crisis happens.
As you think about it, where you go and how you're going to operate certainly could have an impact. I know we have a fairly large number of banks for some reason on today's call, but looking at how you're going to support your customers, what policies are going to need to change during the period, how you best serve them, all of those elements come together to be in place. So you can certainly, if you've got branches open at other locations, they can serve your client base. But looking at what your business operation is, how will it be impacted, what do you need to have in place will make the difference to pull this plan together. While it's fresh in everyone's mind, while the pictures from Puerto Rico are being shown on the television, while the wildfires are out there, the aftermath of the earthquake in Mexico, the shootings in Las Vegas, this is the time to encourage senior leadership to have a conversation to support the plan and level of detail that you need to have. The checklists that we've talked about are a great place to start. But if you haven't thought these through, if you don't have answers to those, then when the event comes, you won't be ready. Follow a predict, plan, perform approach. You know what the predictions will be. What is your plan? What are the checklists? How? And again, the difference between what and how become very important. And then test it. Test it not only in a tabletop simulation, but an actual walkthrough, or having, if you have facilities like Regis, do one of your exercises where the crisis management team goes there to do it, or you take a business function and have them test it from that location to verify it. Do a hot wash after any of those, what worked well, what didn't work well, what are the lessons learned. That's going to maximize your results over time. We hope your business is doing well. We hope that you were not major impacted, and that until our conversation next month, thank you for attending, and we will talk to you soon. Goodbye, everybody.